Hello and welcome. I am Kim Keen, host of the One of a Kind You podcast. I started this podcast to share my journey of my past self, a woman who was struggling with leaving her teaching career and adjusting to stay-at-home mom life, to help other women with their motherhood journeys so they can let go, make themselves a priority without all the sacrificing. So if you are a regular listener to One of a Kind You, thank you so much for taking the time to tune into another episode. If you're new here, welcome. We're just as excited to have you. And thanks so much for stopping by to check it out and see what we have to offer. So the way this podcast usually works is that I share a journal entry of mine from about 5 or 6 years ago when I was in the thick of the struggle, and I reflect on what I know now as a certified life coach and what I wish I had known then. But today we have a special guest. Her name is Emily, and she is a fellow podcasting mom. Her podcast is called the Rise and Shine podcast. And we're going to do a podcast swap. So she's on my podcast first. But without further ado, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about you, Emily.
So I am also a former educator. I was in the classroom for 6 years. And then after I had my kids, I decided that I wanted to be the one to do a lot of the child raising. So I decided to leave the classroom. We relocated our family 5,600 kilometers across Canada,
Wow.
back to where my husband and I grew up, to start our farmstead. But that's not what brought me to what I do.
Yes. So it's funny because I also taught for 6 years, but I didn't leave my teaching career to choose to raise the children. I left because my husband was like, this isn't working anymore and you're miserable. So you need to find something else to do with your time because this just isn't cutting it any longer. And that was devastating. I ugly face cried the day that I put my resignation in. But here's the other crazy part is that we don't have a farmstead yet. And I don't know that I will ever be a farmstead, but we just in October moved into a 300-year-old farmhouse. So you can't see, but behind me, and I usually don't record outside, but there's a lot going on in the house today. But behind me is actually our barn. So you can kind of see the tidbit of it peeking out. So tell me more about your farmstead. Do you have animals? Do you have a farm, a barn? And
yeah, we have our house is 101 years old.
I love it.
So it's a century house.
Yes.
And you can definitely tell in the wintertime.
Uh-huh.
And then in our barn lives our quail, our rabbits. We just had 2 litters of baby bunnies this spring.
I love it.
And then we also have some ducks. We just had some ducklings yesterday. Some chickens. We have some baby chicks. We also have baby quail. And then we also have 4 Nigerian dwarf goats. So
Wow.
I had a picture of a Nigerian dwarf goat on my vision board for 5 years.
Really?
I said, I'm going to have a goat.
Yes.
But the thing is you can't have just one goat.
No.
Because they're a herd animal and they get lonely. Yes. So last year when we moved into our house, we got 3 does. This year we added a buck.
So it's a plan to have baby goats.
It's a plan to have baby goats, and the long-term goal is to be able to have goat milk for our kids because they're lactose intolerant, can't handle cow dairy, but also to make goat soap and other goat products. And I'm in the process now of collecting. They're losing their winter mohair wool. So I'm collecting all of that and going to make yarn. So all kinds of income potential.
Yes.
Also a lot of work.
Yes. So now that we have the barn, so at some point, so we have a bank barn. So it's like built into the side of the hill. And so in the bottom of the bank barn, there are dairy stalls and some horse stalls. But the way that the land is structured now, it's really not ideal for horses or cows. But my daughter is desperately begging us for chickens and goats. And I already take care of the 2 dogs and the cat. So I'm like, I can see it now. The goats and the other livestock that will be in that barn will become my responsibility. And I don't know, I'm quite ready for that. But I don't think we can do the chickens and the quail and the ducks and things like that. Although I'd love to, because we have several fox families living on our property, and so they already chase the birds, like the wild birds, up the trees and things. So I think that would just be like invite them to eat the chickens for a morning snack and lunch and dinner and breakfast and all the things in between. So so I'm not sure that we'll ever get to that point, but I absolutely love your vision for your farmstead. And how many children do you have?
I have 2 little ones. My daughter was born in 2018, and she doesn't know it right now, but she's the catalyst for where I am in life right
Really?
now. And then my son was born just before the pandemic hit in 2020, like literally weeks before the pandemic
Wow.
hit. I remember being in labor, and we were talking about the things that were going on in China and how it's not going to come to North America and
Yes.
all of this stuff. And then we shut down a couple weeks later. So
Yes.
um, it's been a ride.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And so of course I'm outside, and we live in Kennett Square, and it's the mushroom capital of the world apparently. And so there are lots of box trucks that drive up and down our small road because there is a mushroom farm at each end. So I'm like, oh, I didn't hit mute. So hopefully we don't have too many mushroom farm trucks in the background. But so tell us more about because it's interesting that your daughter was the catalyst for where you are now, because me leaving my teaching career was the catalyst for where I am now. So tell us more about that, about your daughter coming into this world and sending you on this journey.
So growing up, I had quite dysfunctional and traumatic childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I thought growing up that time and space would kind of heal all wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my daughter, and all of those repressed emotions came barreling at me like a train rolling down the tracks at full speed.
Mm.
And while I was navigating being a first-time mom, I was also navigating the landmine of mommy issues, daddy issues, childhood abuse, mother-daughter dynamic. Like for the first 6 months of my motherhood, I was petrified
Mm-hmm.
of hurting my daughter the way that I had been hurt. And that fear triggered my stress response. And it was a constant battle. Leave, don't leave, leave, don't leave, leave. I can't do that. I can't do that. Like, it just sent me on this spiral of plunging down into the depth, feeling all of those intense emotions along with postpartum hormones, which just intensified the whole thing. But what that led to was a place where I could heal, and realizing that I was not then, am not now, my biological mother. She made the choices for her, and I don't have to make those same choices because my life circumstances are different
Yes.
than hers were 30 some odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I can choose differently.
Yes.
And so it's been 3.5 years of really digging into all of those emotions,
Mhm.
retraining myself
Mhm.
um, with uh, coping mechanisms, learning how to communicate,
Mhm.
discovering what my empowered mamahood looks like.
Yes.
Um, yeah, it's been, I'm someday she will understand how her role in all of this. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to tell her one day.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. And it's interesting because like you, when I was going through the journal, so my kids were, let's see, I left my teaching career in 2014. So Lily was 5, Casey was 2. And Casey had just turned, yeah, Casey had just turned 2 when I started therapy. And because I was having really not great thoughts about life, not because of motherhood or anything like that, but because of not sticking it through with my teaching career. Because I thought I would teach forever and ever. And then it was
Mhm,
only 6 years and I felt like an epic failure. And so it was therapy that actually, because I went thinking she was gonna be like, okay, Kim, you're having an identity crisis. Here's how you fix it. But it was like, all this childhood stuff came up, all the stuff from
mhm,
the abusive relationship in high school came up. And it was like, do you know you're codependent? Do you know you're anxious? Do you know you suffer from childhood emotional neglect? I had no idea. And when my girls, up until this point, I, for the most part, was pretty confident in my ability as a mom, as a parent. It never occurred to me really that um I maybe wasn't doing things the quote unquote right way, or there was another way. Um, I mean, there were times where I had doubt for sure, but it wasn't until I actually embarked on the journey and started learning about how my childhood was impacting me now as an adult, and the
mhm,
thoughts that I was having around the parent that I was or would be. In that
mhm,
moment, I made this declaration that I would end the cycle. I would break the cycle for my girls because I didn't want my girls to grow up to be like me. I don't want them to have the thoughts that I had or the feelings that I had.
mhm,
And so when I did that, then I went into kind of like crazy lady mode and I tried to micromanage and like literally puppeteer life, the interactions and the dynamics between my husband and my girls and me, my girls and my family. And that wasn't healthy. And it wasn't until the therapist was like, Kim, their existence is not your existence, their experience is not your experience. And then that was like kind of that wake up
mhm,
call where I was like, oh my gosh, in my ability to try and stop it from happening, I'm actually creating it.
mhm,
I'm recreating the things that I don't want created.
mhm.
So have you found yourself in that same boat where you're like trying so hard to change it, but at the same time you're doing the things that you don't want to do?
Yeah, sometimes from time to time, something will happen, a situation will conspire, and I'll react instead of respond.
Yes.
And then once things are done, I just sit back and think to myself, ah, crap,
Yeah.
did I really do that? Because
Yeah.
that was not the way I intended for it to happen.
Yes. Yeah. So when that happens, do you ever go to your littles and say like, "Oh my gosh, mommy is so sorry. I just got overwhelmed in the moment," or not so much because they're still small?
Yeah, I apologize to them.
Yeah.
Sorry, mommy yelled at you. That was not the right
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah. So I often found myself doing the same because I wanted them, and maybe this is the same for you. I wanted my girls to understand that we're going to make mistakes because we're still
Mhm,
figuring things out as we go along.
mhm,
Aside from managing, motherhood through healing trauma, just as
mhm,
humans in general, we don't have life figured out. So there's going to be ups and downs, there's going to be mistakes. But now that I
mhm,
find as my girls get older, I actually explain to them, like, I felt really overwhelmed, girls. I started to feel a little claustrophobic. That was a
mhm,
little bit more than what I felt like I could handle in the moment. And
mhm,
they're good about it. They're like, oh, we understand, we could have given you a minute to, respond instead of like just keep coming at you. So now that they're older,
mhm,
they have more of an understanding of, you know, like my errors, but also their errors, and how we're, you know, we come back together. So I think there's the gift in that, being able to say to your kids, like, I'm so sorry. That wasn't the way I
Yeah.
intended it to be. And it teaches them that it's okay to say sorry, and that they're, you know, going to make mistakes too.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I think for me, it's really important for me to teach my kids uh, that we're human.
Yes.
And just because I'm your mom doesn't mean that I'm never wrong.
Mm-hmm.
All things I do are not perfect. I'm
Mm-hmm.
human. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, and we can learn and grow from them. And there's no shame in that.
Yes.
But admitting when you've made a mistake and apologizing and figuring out a better way, because when you know better, you can do better, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's that's what we're that's what we're in the long game of.
Yes, and you're right. It is such a long game, because I started this journey back in 2014, so 8 years ago, and I'm still on the journey. And I'll always be on the journey, because there's always self evolution, you know,
Mhm.
growth, things to learn. So yeah, it's very much a long game for sure. It's just, as we evolve and go through the journey, it looks different, you know,
Mhm.
because we change as humans, as individuals. So the journey evolves just the same way that we evolve. But it's definitely a long game. It'll be a journey until, you know, I take my last breath, and I'm sure you probably feel the same.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just to reflect, looking at where I was when my daughter was a newborn, or um, on the journey of getting achieving pregnancy to where I am now, is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing to see the evolution, and I know that it will continue. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's like it breathes back that life and energy that was
Hmm.
probably missing. I mean, it was definitely missing for me. I felt so closed off and
Hmm.
disconnected, and didn't realize that I was closed off and disconnected until I was thrust into like this big aha moment that's like, okay, Kim,
Hmm.
this isn't really working, and something's got to change.
Yeah.
Um, so when, at what point, I'll say, what kind of brought you to the awareness that there was a like that you were struggling with after your daughter was born? um was there like one pivotal moment where you just were like, oh, this isn't this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or this isn't continuing the way that I thought it was going to?
I think the first time that I realized that things were not right for me was sitting on my couch, probably 2 weeks postpartum,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that I I was giving myself the ultimatum of staying or leaving, and thinking about the implications of either choice. If I stayed, would I be a good mom?
Mm-hmm.
If I left, I would destroy my daughter, because I know what it's like to have an absent parent.
Mm-hmm.
And I would absolutely destroy my husband. And those two things scared, I felt like an awful human.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I felt like a terrible person. And then a few weeks later, I was terrified to say anything.
Yeah.
My husband knew something was off, but he didn't know
Mm-hmm.
what exactly, because I shut down. A few weeks later, we were in my husband's truck driving home from getting groceries or something. And I broke down in tears, and I looked at him and I said, I hate being a mom. And it broke my heart. But through time, I realized that it wasn't that I hated being a mom because I love my daughter. The connotations in my mind of mom and mother, those two words were negative.
Mm-hmm.
A mom or a mother was someone, in my experience, that hurts, that rejects, that neglects, that abandons. And that's not what I intend. That's not what I wish to do in my daughter and now my son's life. So I use the word mama. It has the same meaning, but it's got a different connotation. And I avoid the words mom and mother on a regular basis. And it's not liberalism or anything of that sort. It's the connotations that it holds in my experience. So
yeah, it's the meanings that you have connected to the words mom and mother, and I get that. Especially mother, that just seems so like cold and sterile anyway. But I love the term mama. I think that's so much more of an endearing term, and there's just so much love and connection behind it. And so first, I just have to say thank you for sharing that you weren't loving being a mom, that you had those feelings, because I think women probably have those feelings more often than we'd like to admit. But it's just a hard thing to actually verbalize and say out loud, because there's so much shame, associated with that, and then the guilt too. But I had those same feelings, and it wasn't that I didn't love being a mom. It's just that I felt like a bad mom. And so because I was trying to heal and cope with all of these things, and I wasn't always present for my kids, I wasn't always patient, and I was filled with so much self-doubt that it really had me second guessing every decision that I made. So so I didn't like it. It was stressful. It wasn't playing out the way that I had envisioned it in my mind, because there was so much pressure. I had put so much pressure on the role of mom, motherhood, mom life, parenting. And so, but I never was brave enough to actually say, like, I hate this right now. This is really not what I signed up for. So the fact that you were able to say that to your husband is really an amazing thing.
Yeah, it really was one of the darkest moments that I've ever encountered in my life. And I've had some pretty dark moments. So it was one of,
I can imagine. And your poor husband probably felt like, oh, like WTF, what is going on? Like, he was probably so blindsided. I know there are times where I've done things to my husband like that, and he's like, alert, like mayday. And so looking back now, I'm like, oh, that poor man. But in the moment, it was just like, no, it's all about me. So how did your husband handle that when you were like, I hate being a mom? Did he was like, I need to pull over?
My husband is really good at covering up his emotions and being very controlled.
Yeah.
So he was like, what about it do you hate?
That's a really great question that he asked you.
So we talked about it, and yeah, he's the very analytical, rational one in our relationship, and I'm more driven by my emotions. Yes. So he keeps me cool. Sometimes there's no cooling me down. So.
Yeah. very similar in that way. My husband's also the same way, very much the analytical one who's like, let's think this through a little bit here. And maybe you should get off the train of emotions. Like, let's pull into the train station for a few minutes and like reground ourselves here. Um, so now that you have this realization, you had your breaking point. What did you do to start changing the feelings? Like, were you able to do that on your own, or did you go to a therapist or a life coach?
I did a few sessions of therapy right out the
Mm-hmm.
gate to get myself out of the hole. And then I really dived into holistic medicine, learning what natural supplements that I could take to help boost my mood
Mm-hmm.
and give my body physically the support that it needed. And then I dived into learning about my stress response because I didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about how stress impacted my body and all of the implications. So I really did a lot of self education. And then I also learned about aroma freedom technique,
Okay.
which is the use of essential oils to activate your olfactory nerve and help you work through different emotions that are stored in your body in different places. So through all of these different sources, I've been able to work through a lot of things, and there's journaling and affirmations. Like it's not there's no one thing. It's been a whole puzzle.
Yes. Yes. I think it's amazing that you are, open and willing to try things on your journey to see what the impact and the benefit are going to be. So I love that you decided to take more of a holistic approach, because I was in therapy for over a year and a half, and that was a train wreck, because the therapist just wanted to put me on anti-anxiety meds or antidepressants. And I didn't want those, because I felt like a failure. So for me to have to take a prescribed medication to be able to cope with life felt like the ultimate fail. And I'm not opposed. Like if someone needs anti-anxiety meds or they need antidepressants, like by all means, I just couldn't allow myself to do that. But it wasn't actually until I started going for Reiki sessions and having energy work done that I actually started to feel lighter. And then it evolved into using crystals and yoga and meditation and journaling and so many different modalities to really help. And so all things that I had no clue about. So how did you discover aromatherapy, that tool for healing?
So I was introduced to essential oils a couple years before we started trying to conceive for allergy relief and boosting my immune system for school, because kids bring all the germs to school.
Oh, yeah.
And you're in the classroom with them for 6 hours a day, and you're bound
Yes.
to catch whatever they bring to school. So that I was using the oils in my classroom, in my life, in my classroom, to manage mood and all of that stuff beforehand. So this was just elevating my use and using it for a different purpose.
Yeah.
So it's and then I discovered I did my health and life coach training, and that was more self-healing and along the way. So there's been so much so much that has contributed to the
Yeah,
journey
I
that.
love it. So it's been so lovely chatting. I feel like we could chat forever and ever and ever because there's so much in your journey to unpack. So we'll
Mhm.
have to do a follow-up episode to have you back on again to keep chatting. But if there's one thing that my listeners, if they're listening and they're like, oh, gosh, that's amazing that Emily did that. I'm in this similar situation, but I just don't know how to get started, or I just don't really know what to do. What would be one, I don't want to say easy because it's not always easy, but like, what's one thing that they can do to get started on their journey today? No pressure, Emily. It's a big question.
One thing that they can do, identify whether or not they believe in themselves.
Yes.
Because whether or not you believe in yourself, and I say this in my book that I released last year,
Yes, I was
whether or
gonna say,
not,
I think there's a book of your, like, I see your last name. I think that's a book up on that bookshelf, and you didn't tell us about that. So after you're done sharing your one thing, you're going to tell us about your book, Emily.
so whether or not you believe in yourself is more important than whether or not anybody else in your life, significant or insignificant, whether or not they believe in you.
Yes.
Because the belief you have in yourself will catapult you so much further than their belief in you.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not your mom, your significant other, your sister, whomever believes in you, it's nice. It's nice to have somebody in your corner, but that their belief in you is not going to change your life.
Yes.
Your belief in you will inspire you and motivate you to take the steps to create the empowered mamahood that you were put on this planet for.
Yes. Yes.
It will change your life and it will change your kids' lives.
Yes. And the relationship, even with your partner, your spouse
Mm-hmm.
as well. Yeah. I always
Yeah.
say, it starts with you first. And
Mm-hmm.
then, anything external is just an added bonus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, Emily, time to talk about the book now.
All right. So this is the first book that I published, and it's called Rising from the Ashes, Reclaiming Your Life After a Traumatic Childhood. And in here, I outline, I believe there's 11 chapters. I outline step by step things that you need to accomplish to rise from the ashes of your traumatic childhood. And spoiler alert, number one is believe in yourself. So,
Oh, there you go. Chapter 1. Perfect place to start.
yes. Yeah. So, this book is available on my website. It's also available on Amazon.
Love it. So you said this is your first book. So are there plans to publish additional books?
Yeah, that book is going to be the first in a series of Rising from the Ashes books. So
Okay.
the big goal is to write, I'm not sure how many books yet, but we're going to talk about Rising from the Ashes with your relationships, with your life purpose or career or whatever, your connection to something greater. It's a baby idea right now, just kind of bubbling.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's amazing. I think it's all so needed. So I'm excited. And we will be sure to put the link for your book in the show notes so that people can just go right there to click that link on Amazon or your website and grab a copy. I'll be grabbing a copy. So, because I love all like self-help books are like my obsession.
Mhm.
So my husband jokes and he's like, Kim, I don't think the weight of the books, the house can support that any longer. So I think we need to go to like self-help book anonymous. I'm like, yeah. So I love all books, self-help. So I'm excited. So I'm gonna grab a copy for sure. And so Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. If you are listening and you felt like this episode was helpful, please feel free to share with a friend. And if you would be so kind to leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. I take time to read all the reviews to ensure that the One of a Kind You podcast continues to be a place of support and guidance and a one-stop shop for resources that you need on your motherhood journey, because let's face it, us moms have to stick together. So thanks so much for tuning into another episode of One of a Kind You, and we will see you next week.